There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
A new vision will govern our land.
Our job is not to divide. Our job is to bring people together.
By the people, for the people, and of the people.
Our youth has power.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Border Talks podcast. My name is Jessica Rodriguez and I am your host. For today's episode, we introduce a new segment to our show called Border Battles. Border Battles is a new segment where we give students a certain set of questions surrounding a topic, and they are allowed to voice their opinions and beliefs, but also listen to the other side. The sole purpose of this segment is to find a common ground with people who share different views and beliefs from their own, and to progress together in important conversations that this community needs. So we'll go ahead and have everyone introduce themselves. We're gonna start with Alex, and then we'll go to Jaden, Angel, and finally Cecy.
My name is Alex Hernandez. I'm a student at TAMIU. I'm a senior and I'm a major in political science and I have a minor in economics.
My name is Angel Alcala. I am a Texas A&M student in College Station. I am a history major with minor in English and anthropology. I'm currently an active duty service member with the military. So I am actually taking my classes away from campus currently.
My name is Cecy. I'm a TAMIU student. I'm a senior, and my major is a double major in political science and sociology.
My name is Jaden. I'm a student at TAMIU. I'm a junior, and I'm a biology major with a minor in music.
Thank you all for coming onto this episode. I'm gonna explain the rules for this segment. So the rules are simple. I will issue a statement, and if you agree with it, I'm gonna ask you all to keep your cameras on. And if you don't agree with the statement, you're gonna turn your cameras off. People who have their cameras on will have 3 minutes each to discuss their points. After that, everyone who disagreed will turn their cameras back on to explain their position again with the 3 minutes. And then finally, we will ask participants if they would like to rebuttal anyone's arguments. And of course, we have rules: no arguing, no slander against one another, and no cutting people's time off. And from there, we can get started. All lives matter.
So I believe all lives matter because, in fact, that they do. But with saying that, I do know that everyone has different struggles, such as the Black community, the Hispanic community. But we cannot demonize using the phrase "all lives matters," because I'm a firm believer that everyone's life matters. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done in life. Your life still matters no matter what. Even if you're a prisoner in prison, you're a POW, you're a terrorist, your life still matters at the end of the day. And the reason that gets demonized a lot is because I believe it has some misconceptions that go back to the Black Lives Matter movement and the organization. And I just want to be perfectly clear that I view that the Black Lives Matter movement is separate from the actual organization. I feel if everyone just came together under a united banner as all lives matter, we can more effectively fight corruption, political corruption, let's say, for example, also police abuse of power, and and hate groups such as the KKK. And this is going to be controversial, but to some extent, some Black organization groups, there's a misconception that the Black Panthers are considered a terrorist group, which they were, but they weren't the biggest threat, if that makes sense. Because we all have to use the slogan "All Lives Matter" to combat the corrupt views of, let's say, the KKK. who believes white supremacy only, and they only believe that the white lives matter in most cases. And if we all came together under the All Lives Matter movement, we can also inspire younger generations to see that it doesn't matter your color, your religion, if you're a woman, man, transgender, that we can all come under the same roof and same banner no matter what. So in fact, if we do see the acts of racism and prejudice, they can know that they are in the wrong and they need to correct their ways.
Okay, so I strongly disagree with the idea that all lives matter. I think I disagree with the statement that all lives matter because it's literally impossible for all lives to matter when clearly there is a problem with the way in which Black lives are specifically being treated. And I know that Angel mentioned that it would be nice and maybe more like ideal and useful or like unifying if we said something like all lives matter, but saying something like all lives matter inherently basically turns a blind eye to the specific and direct problems that are directly happening to Black lives, Latinx lives as well, but especially with Black lives, even like with Latinx people, there's like a whole issue with colorism. So although yes, of course, all lives should matter. All lives definitely should matter. But I think to say all lives matter already in this context of the world that we live in, that phrase is essentially only used in response to when people say Black Lives Matter. Nobody ever said only Black Lives Matter. Everyone said, or people say Black Lives Matter because they mean Black Lives Matter too. Until Black Lives Matter, until Latinx lives matter, until LGBTQ plus lives matter, until all of those lives matter, then it is literally impossible to say that all lives matter and pretend like that is something that can actually exist. And again, I just wanted to reiterate that even though ideally it would be fantastic to say all lives matter and for everyone to unify and be against, like Angel mentioned, political corruption and all of these things, political corruption and a whole bunch of other issues that we see with like systemic racism is specifically directed to people of color, especially Black people. So that is exactly why, even though it would be fantastic to say all lives matter and feel that we can agree with that statement, unfortunately, in the context of the world, is just a response to people trying to bring attention to an issue that specifically is for, or is specifically being experienced by Black lives. So that's what I think.
Okay, so I generally agree with what you said. So I'm not sure how much more I'm gonna add, but basically Black Lives Matter, it's not an exclusionary movement. It doesn't just say, oh, just Black Lives Matter. It's Black Lives Matter, comma, like as well, right? So it's not, I think there's two groups of people when it comes to the All Lives Matter movement, and whether they realize it or not. Like, you have a group who might be more like you, Angel, who see all lives matter, and that's like the utilitarian in you. It's like, oh, that makes sense to me, like all lives matter, right? But you're not realizing that like all lives matter was made just to combat the phrase Black Lives Matter. And a lot of people use it to just dismiss the movement itself. So like people are saying Black Lives Matter because they're facing all these issues with like institutional racism. And then you say all lives matter to that, you're just dismissing their whole argument and you're not listening. So I think all lives matter is like, I think there's some people who unwillingly like really don't know what they're saying. But I think for the most part, most people know what they're saying and they're doing it just to like dismiss like the whole trouble that is happening in our country. So I would be more careful in saying all lives matter, or at least understand where that phrase comes from and who are the people that are using it. And yeah, that I yield the rest of my time.
I also generally agree with both of what they said. I also don't know what else I would add on, but kind of just repeating what you guys said, to say all lives matter, it was made to combat the Black Lives Matter. And I guess my response to that would be Black Lives Matter is more so to say we matter too. We are here, and our lives matter as well. Like if you think about it, like if I have a family member and they're driving, I'm gonna be worried that the cops are gonna target them just because of the color of the skin, or if they're wearing a hijab, they're gonna be called a terrorist, or if they're a little darker in skin, they're just gonna be assumed to be dangerous or criminal. So that's kind of what they mean in the statement where Black Lives Matter is like, we matter as well. Like, please, like, we want to be respected. We want to live. That's mostly, I guess, what I wanted to add on.
I'm going to go ahead and rebuttal the argument about the Black Lives Matter being like our struggles, which I understand. It's just that if you exclusively use the phrase or the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, you get a lot of imposters that don't agree with the movement. And they'll, believe it or not, there's some out there that are Black African Americans that they don't agree with the movement, and they'll start trouble within that movement. And the first thing that automatically people see, which is wrong, but they do see it, the first thing, because it's on all of us, is the skin color of the person. So I want to give a brief example. We had back in 2016, there was a Black woman who claimed she was a Black Lives Matter. And from my understanding, Black Lives Matter says they just want equality. They just want to be viewed as equals and be treated fairly. This woman, who was, I believe, a college student, assaulted a white student for wearing dreadlocks, saying, "You can't wear that, only our people are allowed to wear that." So that's why I'm kind of more for the All Lives Matter slogan, because it might have originated to combat Black Lives Matter, but it doesn't need to stay that way, or it doesn't need to mean that. It doesn't need to be a direct response to combat Black Lives Matter. It can actually become Unitarian in itself with Black Lives Matter, if that makes sense.
I would say that I wouldn't take that one case to like dismiss the whole movement. I think that's just like sensationalist like piece. I think in most part, like most of the people who are in the Black BLM movement are not doing that type of stuff.
And I would also add, that even like anger is going to happen. And while I wouldn't condone someone attacking someone because they're wearing dreadlocks, I think I understand her anger, because like it was literally illegal for Black people to be wearing dreadlocks in their jobs. And even today, sometimes like people see natural Black hairstyles and they consider them unprofessional. If I'm not mistaken, it wasn't until 2013, but I could be mistaken with the year, but for sure it wasn't until like the 2000s that cornrows weren't even allowed in the military. So for her to be angry at someone being able to get away with that, that's a form of cultural appropriation, and that goes into a whole other subject. But with that being said, I agree with Alex. I feel that that's like one specific example, and even within that example, I think anger is warranted. Especially, I don't think it's fair to compare her attacking that man. I believe I've heard of this example, and it was at a staircase, if it's the same video that we're thinking about. But you can't compare that to Black lives literally being taken at the hands of the state, of people who are supposed to exist to protect us. And so I know that ideally the phrase all lives matter and like coming together, like this whole like niceness is something everybody would like to buy into, the same way that everybody would love to buy into the idea of, oh, I don't see color, and so I don't see color, so I'm not racist. But by saying I don't see color, you're inherently denying the experiences of people who are, when people see each other, like we're visual people for the most part. And you mentioned it yourself, like it's what people see. And so I think even though it's ideal to want to believe that these are all things that we can do. I don't see anybody in All Lives Matter talking about children in cages. I don't see anybody who says All Lives Matter doing anything about other lives. And so I think that although it's a nice sentiment, ultimately, like Alex said, it's only ever used in response to people saying Black Lives Matter.
Lootings and protests are justified.
Okay, so first of all, the history of this country, which everyone loves to praise and talk about, like patriotism and all of these things, although it wasn't maybe looting the way that like it seems today, where like they were looting a Target. Boston Tea Party, like they literally destroyed property. When we live in a capitalist society where money is at the core of most things, then of course you're going to show the seriousness of your anger and the issues by looting. I think that although it's not something I would personally do, I can't say that it's something that I have a say in, because I'm not a Black person, and so I can't tell them that they're wrong when lives are being taken away. I think that when people are more concerned about looting than they are about Black lives being literally taken forever, there's no comparison in my opinion, because you can regain financial aspects, but there's no snapping and then you get another life back. So I think looting is definitely a legitimate form of protest.
Okay. I'm very conflicted when it comes to it. So there's some things that I agree with. I mean, I generally agree. I think people have the right to be mad and to like show anger and react in this way. I don't think they should be blamed for anything. But I think when it comes to what specific actions they should make, like I'm completely fine with them destroying or looting like government property, right? Because to them, those are symbols of authority that have been neglecting them for like their whole lives and like made their parents' lives and their grandparents' life and their history. So if there's a police car that's being burned or a police station that's being burnt or being tagged or something, in my eyes, it's like, okay, they're just reacting to what's happening. Like that's them acting against authority. I think it's a different case when you see them attacking like gas stations or restaurants or stores. I think that's a different thing. But again, I don't think that I should be the one to tell them, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Because at the end of the day, we're not the ones that are in that, and we're not the ones that are experiencing those problems. So I think I would rather see them, do acts against signs of authority than like some shops on like the street. But I think overall, I agree with the sentiment. Yeah.
And I guess in response to that, what we saw this year in response to George Floyd's murder, the looting that happened here, it was pretty much everywhere, even in small shops, which a lot of people wanted to bring about, like, oh, then why do you support looting if they're destroying small shops? Well, actually, the small shops that we saw were embedded kind of in the community, where they gave back to the students in the community, the schools in the community. They didn't have history of racism, or they didn't have history of excluding other people from their shops. They would ask, hey, we were looted, or they destroyed our property, whatnot, and they would say, hey, can you help us? And community members, organizations, they would bring enough money to kind of rebuild their shops. And even in then some, I saw a lot of small shops that were looted and they asked for help, and they were able to raise enough money and like even more beyond their goal. So just to bring about that that argument that looting isn't justified, we're not the ones to say, because we're not organizers. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And yes, there are going to be people that are going to loot just because everyone else is doing it. But then in that case, if there are shops and there are community members that have history of maybe they weren't kind to their community, or maybe they weren't giving back, or they were racist, or they had history of that or whatnot. If they ask for help, of course the community is not going to help them back. So when I saw that, like on Facebook, people would raise money for their own community members because they saw, hey, they needed help and maybe they were looted or their shops were destroyed and they didn't deserve this. So yeah, that's why I say looting is justified, because we're not behind the scenes of what's going on.
So with me, the sole purpose that, well, not the sole, but one of the main reasons I'm against looting is because people don't tend to loot the right targets. Like Alex said, like government buildings and corporations, they have the funds to actually replace all of the losses. Local mom and pop shops, they don't. That could be the whole livelihood. And taking into what Jaden put in about local communities giving back, or saying that, hey, I know like he was a real hard worker, let's help him, let's raise money to help him rebuild. It shouldn't have to come to that, because if he was well known as not being a racist, why would they still loot his building? And it goes back to my next point. Well, it gives people who don't really care about the movement, or who really don't care about anyone else except themselves, a chance to cause chaos, which not only makes the movement look bad, even though it might not even be a person within the organization or the movement. You have this one selfish individual taint that whole, all the hard work that they put in. But going back to what Cecy said about the Boston Tea Party, is that, yes, that was a perfect example of what she used about people coming together to loot, tearing the government. But you have to remember that it was the British. So it was like the colonies against the British. So it was a unified settlement against the British. And it's also important to know that each location is a case-by-case basis. So when George Floyd was murdered, absolutely, they had every right to do what they did, to loot, because that specific city has had a long history of being corrupt. But then you go to a different part of the country where police brutality isn't like really occurring. You can still get cases, like maybe 1 or 2 cases, or maybe more, depending on the city. And then you just have people saying, oh, they did this in LA, they did this in Atlanta, let's do it here and see what we can get. And then you have bigger issues at hand, because then the government gets involved, local police get involved, state guard, and it just keeps piling on and on.
So I don't really have a rebuttal, just something else to add. I think in terms of people within like this movement, or just people like on the left, or for people who are on the streets, and there's to be a more direct guide of like what's supposed to happen, what's not. Like I've seen videos of like BLM people telling looters to like F off and like not destroy building, because they know that it hurts the movement in general. And I've seen like a video of like Ilhan Omar like saying that looting is like bad, and those are not the same people that are in like the BLM movement. And I agree to a certain point, but then also hear other people who are in like support BLM but also support looting. So I think it's just like there's very contradictory opinions even within this side as well. So I think the lines need to get a little less blurry over like what's right and what's wrong. But yeah, I think, I don't know, that's just my opinion. I wish it was clear to give like a better answer, but I don't have it.
Well, I do have a rebuttal. So Angel mentions that, well, we should, like, it shouldn't even get to that point where they need to donate to these mom and pop shops if they know that they're not racist. But I would take it even a step back further, where it shouldn't get to the point where people should have to protest and loot because Black lives are being taken at the hands of government entities and people who are working in the capacity like of the government. Like we shouldn't need to even protest like, hey, my life matters, Black Lives Matter. People shouldn't even need to protest that, but unfortunately that's the place where we're at. So of course unfortunate things are going to happen, like mom and pop shops being destroyed, and even though I personally don't like it and I personally would hate to see that happen to anyone, I think that ultimately we can't and we shouldn't put more concern on mom and pop shops and on all of these monetary and financial objects. It's just focusing the attention on that it just doesn't make sense to me compared to like literal lives. I don't think property should ever be over anybody's life. And with that being said, also with like the Boston Tea Party and the colonies, like yes, they were against the British, and yes, generally there was a lot of people who were down to not be British, but there still was people that were like loyal to them, and so I would say that that doesn't really apply.
Law enforcement in the US has become militarized.
I think I see that statement to me is just a fact. Like there's no denying that it's not militarized. So what has been leading to the militarization of police it's a program by the defense program. It's called the 1033, which allows like police stations to buy surplus military equipment, whether it be like vehicles or guns or basically anything that could fall under that umbrella. So basically all the stuff that they get is free for them. All they have to pay is shipping and like the maintenance. So you have all these like police departments that are getting this military gear and they just get to like stockpile it. And there's also a rule within that program that they have to use it within a year of the purchase. So if they're getting all this military gear and there's a threat that if they don't use it in a year, they're going to have to return it. Well, obviously you're going to have more police having to use this military gear, whether it's not even for something that they need to. So even if it's like, I don't know, like a robbery, they'll send like some big armored vehicle just to like use that equipment. And I think that just leads to like the militarization of police. Like it's just, I think it's created a system where like it's just not helpful for anybody. I think even in communities, like if you see the officer that's patrolling your area and you see that he's like in full gear and he has assault rifles in his vehicle, you're less likely to trust that person than to say like, oh yeah, that's a police officer, I know his face or whatever, or I know his name when he's dressed like he's about to go to like Afghanistan or something. Yeah, I think it's without a doubt that the military the police have been super militarized.
I very much agree with Alex. I didn't know about that like law, but yeah, I think it's a fact that the police has become more militarized when we have the amount of weapons and all of the things that they're having access to, and like I think Alex said it perfectly, like all of the way in which that they have, like they basically have to use these things, or if not they have to return them, and the fact that they would even get them in the first place to me is alarming. But I think Alex said it really well and I agree with everything that he said.
I also agree with what you guys said. I didn't know what Alex had said. That was kind of interesting to know, especially because where I grew up in Chicago, people think of, oh, it's like, it's a war zone over here. But in reality, it's, you really see the reaction of police in regards to what happens here. So you call the police and say, hey, my neighbors are fighting. Instead of sending one police car to check on it, to see what's going on, they send a bunch of police cars and they have a bunch of weapons to just de-escalate a small situation. And even more in poor, low-income or colored neighborhoods, you see a lot of police that have so many equipment just to de-escalate small situations, which is scary because of a lot of these situations are occurring like with children. A lot of people, they say, oh, there are kids in my backyard. Then again, you see a bunch of police coming with, as he said, like assault weapons to de-escalate the situation, or telling a bunch of kids, hey, get off their property. So I do agree with that statement because I've seen it here in my city. So yeah.
So when people use the term the U.S. Law enforcement has become more militarized, I strongly disagree with that, because the equipment they're getting is actually better than the ones that we currently have in the military. That's why when someone says militarized, it's like, no, they're getting more stuff better than us, and they're getting stuff that actually fits them, that actually works. And the military personnel, we're held at a higher standard. If we do something that's like out of orders, it doesn't matter if we're in the right or wrong, automatically you're court-martialed. You're going to court and you have to defend yourself. So, and when I see law enforcement say they're getting militarized, they ain't getting militarized. If they were getting militarized, the cop will be honest, out of a job currently, waiting trial, and no pension until his trial clears. And he's found innocent in a court of law, and he's not out on bail. Because with the U.S. military, they send you to a little place called Fort Leavenworth, and that shit is a hellhole. In the summer, the heat is on. In the winter, the air conditioner is on. So when they say the law enforcement in the U.S. has become militarized, I disagree with it, because they're actually becoming a state police and trying to lean more towards a faster state more than anything else. Because real quick, in Costa Rica, when I went with the Army, with the ROTC program at A&M, I saw that Costa Rica had no military, except they had police. And the police would not let Nicaraguans live in the city limits. They would have to live in the slums outside city limits. And if you're caught in Costa Rica without an ID, you're automatically being sentenced to two weeks in jail.
So I see what you're saying. It's actually kind of funny because, like, you being from the military, you see, like, when people say, oh, the police are being militarized, that's like an insult to you, because it's like, oh no, they're like way worse than we are. Like, they have better stuff than we do, yet they behave much worse. I think that's like an interesting take. But at the same time, I think it also helps, like, okay, yeah, so then they're getting gear that to you, like, it's much better than what you guys have, and yet they get all the access to it, and they get to do all these actions, and they're usually not reprimanded for it. So they're not being held to like a higher standard, but yet they're being given the same amount of equipment, if not better. So I think that actually does help to say that, yes, they're being militarized in the terms of their equipment, but in terms of their behavior, they're much worse than that. I think that's fair to say.
Right. I completely agree with that. I was going to say, I think it's just very alarming that maybe the statement is better said if we say the access to weapons that they have is being militarized, but the way in which they're being trained and the way that their behavior is controlled and reprimanded is, I guess in this case, unfortunately not being militarized, because you said it, they would be likely have better, like, there would hopefully be more justice if they were militarized in terms of their actions. So that's very scary and very interesting to hear, but scary.
We should defund the police.
I just want to say when I say defund the police, I don't mean nationwide, because it really depends on the city and state. Because we don't know the needs of each individual city. Well, actually, each individual state, let alone city, because each city should be able to govern themselves and then work their way up to the state level, and then further up to the nationwide. But I do believe the cops need to get defunded when it comes to equipment, because there's no reason for the police force to have like let's say 10 tanks in one department when we have tanks breaking down every two weeks or so, and we have to fix them ourselves. If not, we lose one tank for, let's say, half a year.
Yeah, I think just to like say what defund the police is, because I've seen a lot of people on the right just they see defund the police, maybe not necessarily just the right, maybe just people who don't know what it necessarily means, and it equates to like no police, which is not the case. Like defund the police is really just like a reallocation of funds. So that when it comes to like some cities, they have like huge police budgets, and they lack in like other places where they can like reallocate those funds like into like healthcare or housing or community projects, like stuff that can reduce like the amount of crime in a certain area or in a certain city. But yet they'll put all that money instead into like police. So then you create like this police state who have like all this money and all this power. And instead of like helping these communities, you're just sending more police into those communities. And they're over policing people, and they're stopping more people, and they're arresting more people. And it just creates like this cycle of like viciousness. I had another point to that. I guess also like another argument for defund the police is like, I think in our current state, we depend on the police to do too much, in the sense of like, police will like respond to like all sorts of calls where they're necessarily not really needed. So I've had like the police call to like my workplace to like settle like little like beefs like on the side of like maybe like two coworkers are like fighting with each other for some reason, and now the police have to show up for something. Or like maybe like if your dog is loose, like they have to call the police for that just because now they have like a police officer chasing a dog in the street. Even like mental issues, like, you know, someone is not feeling well or they're acting like in a weird manner, maybe it'd be better to send like a social worker or someone who actually knows how to like work with mental patients instead of sending a police officer. Like you're sending all these police officers who don't really know how to handle certain issues. And in some cases, whether the officer intends to or not, they may escalate the situation just by not knowing what they're supposed to do. And yeah, defund just means reallocate funds so they can be spent properly.
I agree with what Alex says in that, like, defund the police doesn't necessarily mean there will not be any police presence, like any police available. But with that being said, like, it was one of the like chief police officers or a higher up in Dallas from like the police, and he himself said like the police are expected to do way too much, and Alex said this in his statement, and I completely agree. Like it's when we say defund the police, it means reallocate these funds into spaces where it would likely be better used. And there's actually a Simpsons episode where Marge Simpson becomes a police officer, and so then Lisa tells her like, oh, I understand that like you're trying to do good and like you're trying to be like a good member of society and like help and stuff, but wouldn't it be better if we just directly address these problems by things that Alex said, giving better mental health services, helping people, like marginalized communities, get out of those like systems of poverty and all those things. And so I think that defunding the police, especially defunding things like their militarized weapons, would be an excellent thing to do so that we could reallocate those funds. If police can have tanks and better weapons than our own military, then why is it that children in our schools can't get lunch because they have an overdue like tab? That shouldn't be a thing, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with Cecy when she said about the reallocation of funds, especially because I'm going to say it again, because of where I come from and what I've seen here in my city, because I've seen it a lot, where schools get shut down in neighborhood schools, and neighborhoods are in low income or poor neighborhoods. So there are kids that can't go to school because it's too far or it's too expensive to pay for a private school, or you have to go through a lottery to get into a school, and still those schools are too far away for kids to get to. And we've seen that a lot of these schools that they've closed down, they put police academies into these schools instead of funding the schools in themselves, you know? And I find that a little, I don't know, it doesn't seem right to me that you're gonna close down a school in a poor neighborhood where kids need to go to school, you know, basic, and you're gonna put a police academy there for more police presence in those communities where they're actually being targeted rather than being protected. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that statement.
I just want to add also that with defund the police, I mean, like, we need to really like backtrack on like the equipment, the firearms, and the riot control tanks, because in all honesty, you might use that one tank or those two tanks, however many riot tanks they have, for what, once a year, twice a year, once for like, let's say the Super Bowl game in your local state or city, and then that's it. Like, and then not only that is that you're spending so much money on this equipment, like the weapons, you're neglecting the investigators that are going after child sex traffickers. You're taking away the pension from officers that are close to retirement or who are starting the line of duty. If you really want these funds for the police, you need to take care of the people that have actually done the jobs correctly and properly, and then help, and then like improve the academies you have right now. You don't need to open 2 more academies. You know, fix this academy up and focus more on the law aspects of what you can't and can't do as a police officer.
There are more good cops than bad cops.
So with me, I personally see a lot more cops doing their jobs correctly than I see them doing them incorrectly. And we also, like, I don't know if it was Jaden or Cecy that said, we can't judge a whole movement based on the actions of one individual. And that goes the same. And I know a lot of people say that, well, Blue Lives Matter isn't a skin color or anything like that. It's a profession. And yes, it is a profession, but you choose that profession to protect others and to serve others, just like in the military. In the military, we have a lot of shitbags, but we have a lot more people doing their jobs correctly and are outstanding individuals in their own right on that get all the hate because of the actions of 1 or 2 individuals. Like that soldier from Fort Hood, Miss Vanessa, the PFC Vanessa. Everyone was pissed at Fort Hood because there has been countless accusations and known rings in that base, and a lot of people in the military want that base to be reformed into a new base after a Hispanic Medal of Honor recipient instead of a Confederate general. So are there a lot more good cops than bad cops? Yes, absolutely. We can't judge the actions of 1 or 2 individuals and then label a whole group of people the same.
Okay. So I understand the arguments that I'm probably gonna hear. Basically, like, when you have all these bad police officers, the argument is like, well, you know, you say that everyone's to blame because these good officers, even though they were well intentioned, they're allowing for this stuff to happen. They're allowing for like those other police officers to like keep patrolling, or they're not doing anything to like fix the system. But I guess in my rebuttal is like, I think most people who join the police force are well intentioned, and I think like in our community, being a police officer is a pretty good paying job, and you get benefits, and you can really help your family. I just think sometimes you're put in a position where you're almost powerless. So if a cop that you know does something bad and you try to do something against it, there's a good chance that you're going to be reprimanded by a superior, or that you're going to get time off for even like threatening to file a complaint against a police officer. So I think there's good cops, but they're just in the bad system. And it's the system overall that needs to be changed, instead of like the majority of police officers. I think most police officers want a better system, but they're just not in it. And I think another response to that would be like, oh, well, like, why don't they just like get a new job or quit, whatever. But at the same time, it's like, we're all chained to like living in a way where we have to like support our families in some sort of way. So I think that's a very easy answer to say, oh, well, like, if you want to do something about it, like, why don't you just quit your job if you like feel bad about being a police officer? Well, I mean, there's always more to that. And I guess I have a bias because I have family that are in law enforcement, and I know they're good people, and I know that they have the same complaints that I have. And some of the coworkers don't agree with them, but I know that if they could change the system, they would. But in that state, sometimes they're just powerless to do anything else. But you try to be a good cop.
Can I just say, I really like what you said, Alex, how some cops, they do feel powerless, even when they want to do good. And it was kind of hard to decide with that statement, because even I also know cops that they're great people, but then you have to kind of decide where they stand as being good people and being good cops, because then again, they're centered, they have to follow certain orders, or they have to accompany certain partners that maybe don't do better. Maybe they can't stop them from not doing bad things. And even so, recently I've heard that when the lootings were happening, their sergeants or whoever sends the cops to certain neighborhoods, they told them, don't go to these low income or these Black neighborhoods. So I live in a predominantly Black neighborhood, and they told them not to come here so that they allow us to destroy our own neighborhoods. And rather, they send all of their cops to suburbs. They send them to predominantly white or higher income neighborhoods. And then again, that goes into the system being, not really right, because then again, it's kind of racist to say, hey, why are you like someone else rather than another, when you're meant to protect everyone in your city or in your state, whatnot. And then again, I disagree with that statement, because policing itself comes from a racist system. So in that case, then I would agree with you, because yeah, policing in general needs to have change.
So the reason why I disagree with this statement is because the occupation of a cop, it was mentioned in the people that agreed, like, the occupation is an occupation. There is that is not who they are. They chose to do it. And with that being said, I don't think that I agree that the likelihood of most people who choose to be cops, I believe most people who choose to be cops are likely good people. That being said, when they act in their capacity as a police officer, their job in and of itself is what I believe is bad. So people say things like ACAB, all cops are bad. And that doesn't necessarily mean every single person that is a cop is a horrible person and I hate them and they're terrible people. It means that what they do when they act in their capacity as police officers is a bad choice. And I like that Alex mentions that they're tied down to this system, and even if they did want to change it, it's hard to do that because it's a systemic thing. However, I would argue that the fact that something like Blue Lives Matter is even is something that even exists is an alarming thing to hear, because I think that a lot of cops agree with that statement. And I understand it because you mentioned it. They have families, they have livelihoods, they want to be safe when they go into their jobs. But it is just a job. And even if it is what provides for them and for their family, ultimately it's a choice that they made. And although I don't completely hold them accountable to being I would never tell someone hey, quit your job because it's a terrible thing to do. But I would say, if we're saying things like Blue Lives Matter, instead of saying Blue Lives Matter, so let's change or reform or defund police systems, then I think that's a problem. And so I think for me, I would say overwhelmingly most people who choose to be cops are good, but there is no cop that is good because of the way that the system itself is flawed.
It goes back to state laws and local laws. It really depends on how lenient police officers can be and how much of dickheads they have to be. So it really depends on your local chief of police, the governor. If he's really wants to be really hard on crime and be like, no, we need everyone that smokes weed in jail right now. And then you have like cops that are like, I'm not gonna bust a kid who's only 16 for a joint. I can just give him a warning. But then it goes back to the chief who has to report back to the governor or whoever has to report back to. He's like, no, I said if they smoke weed or they test positive, they have to be arrested, put in jail. So I think it goes back more to the people in power, like politicians, who are trying to make a statement on being like, no, we have to be tough on crime to discourage crime, instead of being like, no, we don't. There is like, we can give people warnings. There is rehabilitation programs. Like a person doesn't have to go to jail to get clean, or doesn't have to get arrested to learn a valuable life lesson.
So it is exactly because of that, like that whole thing you described, that I feel that statements like all cops are bad are valid. Because I don't think that those people themselves in their personal lives are bad people, and they probably joined like the police force because they wanted to do good things. But with that being said, like Angel mentioned, it's just the system itself is flawed and is problematic. And so long as that system is flawed and we have things like the prison industrial complex system and a whole bunch of other things happening, then there's no way that you can, while you're acting as an officer, then there's no way that as an officer you can be good because you're serving a bad or flawed system.
We are making progress as a country.
I say that we are making progress as a country because more and more corrupt cops are being held accountable for their actions instead of getting away with it. That being said, there's still a long way to go, but we as a country are making progress. We're becoming more united. People say we're getting divisive. That I don't believe that's the case. I just think people are now starting to understand each other's ideals more. And like look at us, for example. I know Jess mentioned that a lot of people in this chat may be more to the left, but I consider myself more conservative. So just the fact that we're having this interaction and that we're all here is like a mind-blowing, because I want to say back in like 2000, if you're a Democrat, you never hung out or spoke to a Republican, and vice versa. But now more and more people are starting to find mutual ground and understand each other more. And I think that's a beautiful thing that should just continue to grow.
I think that for me, as much as I see all of these issues, and that I think I agree with Angel in that there is a long way to go. I think that progress is progress, and we have, or maybe it's just like my positive, or the fact that I like to see the like glass half full, but I think that we are seeing progress, like even locally. When had we ever seen like so many young people come together to protest anything, let alone something like Black Lives Matter, which and like police brutality, which is something that we had never seen. And so I think even though it's little and it's just maybe like a small speck of change, I think ultimately like it is progress, because we've seen how it is possible for our community to come together, and like that progress that the entire country is seeing, we've seen even like trickle down locally in the form of protests, or like even this conversation that we're having, like Angel said. I think this conversation itself is a reflection of the country, in my opinion, very slowly progressing, but progressing in the aggregate.
I guess I changed it back only because I would say to an extent we've made progress. Like what you guys both said, I agree, because yes, we're able to come together and we're able to combat certain issues together through the youth. And honestly, I do agree with that. But still, I would say only because even today there's still discrimination against people of color, people because of their sexuality. And I mean, I would say there's progress in the way that people are more accepting of each other, but only because I see that people are being, harmed or they're being killed because of these, these things that they do have, they're part of. I don't know. It's a difficult statement to say only because of what goes on today. I don't know if that makes sense.
So I think I'm viewing the word country in a different sense than you guys may, or like I actually like agree with what Jaden said. I think there are people and places of power like this current president who are purposefully trying to move the country backwards. I think there's people who actively are fighting for that. And I think in that sense, they've done a lot of harm, and in that sense, like the country is not progressing. And I think even like people who are supposed to be Democrats or in the Democratic Party will usually bend the knee and agree to certain policies that will not help this country progress. Or are they doing the most to like the smallest steps to like a progressive society? But in terms of the people within the country, I agree with what Cecy and Angel said. I think the people within the country are more progressive. I think they understand a little bit more of the issues that are facing us. I think we can agree on a lot more than we think. But in a sense of like as a country, I think those who have the power right now are trying to reverse that. But I think the more conversations we have like these with people across the aisle, and the more we can like agree on, I think that overall is a positive. And I think we can work together to try to make sure that those people, those who are in power, like don't try to stop the movement or stop like the progression of the country.
I just want to also add that though I consider myself conservative, I do want to highlight one key issue about that. And I see it a lot. Conservatives, they don't like change. But I just want to tell like my fellow conservatives and people that lean more towards the right that you may not like change, but you can't stop change. It's going to continue with or without you. You can be an old grumpy dude just saying like, damn, these kids fucked up my country, or you can be like, no, I saw the points, we met a common ground, and we were both able to make a better country together by mutually respecting each other's and our opinions and views. And now we have a better country for everyone involved, not just my selfish needs, but for their views and their opinions as well.
Okay, well, thank you once again, guys, for joining. I really appreciate your time. Want to say thank you to Angel, Cecy, Jaden, and Alex. You guys are awesome, and I'm pretty sure that this conversation will be heard by many, and hopefully for next week we'll have a new episode for you on Wednesday. And thank you so much for joining us. This is the Border Talks podcast. All right, bye, guys.